Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In speaking to part two of this bill, I'd just like to remind the House as to the actual history of this bill, because it is pretty important just to keep that in the public's mind. There were two cabinet papers, as I understand it, that came before the Cabinet in 2011, which is actually 3 years ago. And the issue that was being considered was to whether or not there was a case for criminalising directors' statutory duties. And that arose within the Ministry of Economic Development, and it was part of, I think, a 2010 securities law review discussion paper. So actually this history of this legislation goes back to 2010, and then it came to Cabinet in 2011, and then it ended up taking 18 months to get through the Select Committee process, and its second reading was a year ago in 2013. So I think nobody can dispute the history of this piece of legislation, and again, it would be quite good if the Minister could actually get up and say why he thinks it took so long. I also want to just remind everybody as to what one of the major issues was that really sparked, I guess, impetus around this issue, and this was when New Zealand in 2012 actually, and it was the 27th of June, so that's nearly 2 years ago. 2 years ago minus 9 days, and when New Zealand actually got removed from what's something called the White List, which is a European Union list which provides guidance for EU banks and financial institutions about countries with EU equivalent money laundering and anti-terrorist financing laws, and so they have a white list, and that's basically the countries that are the preferred countries, the countries that are transparent, that have got good laws in place, that actually do the right thing in terms of dealing to anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism around financing standards. So we got removed in 2012. Now, New Zealanders listening out there tonight, in 2012, that's 2 years ago, this government that claims that it's the government for business and, transparency and all of that sort of thing, New Zealand got removed from that white list 2 years ago, and it got removed because we were basically being told that we had to undertake additional measures to ensure that customers, including companies from New Zealand, are who they say they are. Now, that's essentially that we have to be able to reassure people that businesses and business transactions that are happening in this country are actually transparent, and that we're doing everything that we can to ensure that dodgy behaviour isn't happening and people aren't getting away with it. Well, you'd think that this government, which claims that it's the government for business, would actually have thought that this was a priority. Well, why wasn't it a priority? We've been removed from a list. Well, Minister Bridges, how about getting up and taking a call and telling us what your views are on this? Because why has it taken 2 years for a piece of legislation that was already going before a select committee? Why wasn't it a priority? Why wasn't it a priority? What's the answer? Yeah, but what is actually the answer? Why wasn't it a priority? A busy government is the answer. It was a busy government. So what was the government actually busy with? What about our international reputation? What about our reputation and why, and getting back onto that white list? Why isn't that a priority? And yes, that would be great if he takes a call, because we'd actually might get an answer. So, Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Chair. A very good decision. So, we got dumped from that list, and that was around growing publicity around New Zealand registered companies being linked to crime overseas. And there was a report by the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project on how, and there was a company called Tormex Limited, a New Zealand registered company, allegedly laundered $680 million through a Latvian bank account. And that was just one of many examples of entities that exploited New Zealand's simple company registration regime. There were plenty of other examples, and I know that the Select Committee considered many of those examples and took that issue really seriously, because we were actually doing our job in this Parliament of thinking, right, we've got to sort this, we've been removed from this white list, we've actually got to get the issues sorted. Yet it's 2 years down the track, the legislation came back to the House and it still hasn't been passed, it still hasn't gone through the House. And so what's happened to our reputation? Well, they've all got their heads down on the other side of the House, so clearly they actually didn't think that it was that important. That there were obviously other more politically expedient pieces of legislation that they could put through the House that would impact on people who were actually more vulnerable people, and for some reason they just decided to take their time. But the Select Committee actually did quite a lot of work on this, and we recommended, and this goes to the part 2, Mr. Chair, around the requirement for directors that live in New Zealand. And we recommend, and this is actually quite a good part of this legislation, there was a lot of work done on this. We recommended that the requirements for an agent living in New Zealand be omitted, and that better balance could be achieved by requiring a company to have a director who lives in New Zealand, or who lives in and is a director of a company in a country with which New Zealand has reciprocal arrangements for the enforcement of low-level criminal fines. This was pretty important. We strengthened the legislation before the Select Committee on this. We put a higher test into the legislation, and I'm just going to read out what it says in the commentary, because it's quite important, that the purpose of requiring a director who lives in New Zealand is to ensure that there is an identifiable individual with a substantive connection with the company, who can be questioned about the activities of the company, and who can, in certain circumstances, be held to account. That is so important. So it can't just be an address, it can't just be a shop, a door behind which there is no actual person. We heard submissions on this issue. We knew that it was really important to actually ensure through legislation that there could be actual people. This is the committee working together. The big problem is, Mr. Bridges, that we haven't actually got to the point of passing the legislation. But it's important that the people of New Zealand know tonight that that government over there is actually not that concerned about white-collar criminals. That not you, Mr. Chair, this government drags its heels on putting this sort of legislation through. You don't consider it urgent, you don't consider it that important. It's obviously put down the pecking order because you're such a busy government doing other things that are actually going to impact on ordinary, struggling New Zealanders who are just trying to keep their heads above water and pay their bills every week. Instead, we're letting the white-collar criminals in this country off the hook. This piece of legislation does need to get passed. It needs to get passed soon. We've got to address these issues. The work that was done in the Select Committee by the officials, thank you very much, and by the Select Committee generally around this is important. I have no idea why this, as with so many bills that seem to come before the House on these sorts of issues, takes so long to actually get through the House. I'd really like to hear the Minister get up and tell us why that is. Why is it that his legislation seems to get put down at the bottom of the list? at the bottom of the list. Is it because he's a junior minister?
Yep.
Is it
nobody
because
takes him seriously in cabinet, I hear.
what is it? Is it that the minister sitting there seems to have a louder voice and therefore his stuff gets put up there? Priority
Dr. Cam Calder.
I move that the question be now put.
Question is that the question be now put. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. We have one SOP. That's the Minister's amendment set out on SOP number 465. Question is that the Minister's amendments be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. The question now is that Part 2 as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. Move to Schedule 1, and the question is that Schedule 1 stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. Move to Schedule 2. There are some amendments by the Minister set out on SOP number 465. Question is the Minister's amendments to Schedule 2 be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. The question is that Schedule 2 as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. We move to Schedule 2A. There are some Minister's amendments set out on Schedule 2A on SOP number 465. The question is that the Minister's amendments be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. The question now is that Schedule 2A as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. On Schedule 2B, new Schedule 2B, that the Minister's amendments to 2B set out on SOP number 465 be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. The question is that Schedule 2B as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. The question is that Schedule 3 stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. We move to clauses 1 and 2. Question is that clause... Are you seeking a call?
Yes, I am.
Well,
Mr. Chair.
You must call.
Mr. Chair.
Chris Farford.
Thank you very much for giving me a call on the title and commencement.